Hello there, anatomy class. Miss Hardy here. Today we are going to be going over the functions and control of the endocrine system through this online lesson. To get you a little acquainted with this online lesson and some of the things you're going to see in here, this wonderful program allows me to write on the slide as I am recording. So occasionally you'll see me write things on the slide, as in going to write my name here, Miss Hardy. And the other thing that you want to be aware of is sometimes I am going to use this laser pointer to point out something important. And there's the laser pointer going. Alright, as we get started here, you're going to need your notes in front of you. The substitute teacher gave you. They are labeled the endocrine system notes. And just as we would with a regular lecture, we're going to go through here and you can fill in the blanks in your notes as we go. Alrighty. Right, in this lesson here today, we are going to be looking at 4 sections, and after just about every section, we're going to have a little checkpoint quiz where you're going to stop the video and go through and answer 5 questions. These will be recorded for points, so I would highly suggest doing them. All right, so the first thing we are going to go over is, what is the endocrine system? You've heard of the endocrine system. Now we'd like to know what it does. The second thing we are going to go over is the anatomy of the endocrine system, and we are going to focus on 2 types of glands, endocrine glands and exocrine glands. We'll find out what those are here momentarily. Then we are going to talk about the chemical messengers of the body, hormones, and then we will talk about hormone secretion control and the endocrine system. All right. What is the endocrine system? The endocrine system is a collection of organs and small glands that directly or indirectly influence all of the functions of the body. Every function of the body is either directly or indirectly influenced by the endocrine system. The endocrine system, you could say, kind of runs the body behind the scenes, makes bodily functions happen. Alright, the major organs and glands of the endocrine system. We have 3 of these that are in the cranial cavity. We have the hypothalamus, hypo meaning under the thalamus. Then we have the pituitary gland that is also in your brain. And then we have the pineal gland. Remember the pineal gland? We talked about that in the nervous system. So the pineal gland seems to have a part in both the nervous system and the endocrine system. Then we have the thyroid. The thyroid is in your neck, just under your Adam's apple. Then we have the parathyroid, which is paired with the thyroid. Then we have the thymus, which is in your chest cavity. We have our adrenal glands. You can remember where those adrenal glands are by talking about ad on top, renal, kidney on top of the kidneys. Then there's our kidneys. Then we have our pancreas, one of our most important endocrine system components. We talk about that when we talk about diabetes and other digestive disorders. And then, depending on if your sex is male or female, you will have your ovaries and uterus or your testes involved in your endocrine system. Alright, if you think back to our roadmap here when we started out, there were 2 types of glands that were in the endocrine system. We have the endocrine glands and the exocrine glands. They both have small differences and do different mechanisms of releasing their hormones. So we're going to start with, what is a hormone? A hormone is a chemical messenger of the body. These hormones are the chemicals that will attach to receptors and say, hey, it is time to do this action. So, talking about endocrine glands, these are ductless glands, meaning there are no ducts that the hormones go through, and they internally secrete hormones directly into the bloodstream. So these glands will push doses of hormone directly into the bloodstream to get to other parts of the body. So some of these endocrine glands will include the hypothalamus, the thyroid gland, the pancreas, the pineal gland, pituitary gland, the testes, the adrenal gland, and the ovaries. So like we said just a second ago, here are some of our endocrine glands. We have the hypothalamus in the brain, the pineal gland in the brain, the pituitary gland in the brain. Then we have the thyroid gland, the thymus, the adrenal glands, the pancreas, and the ovaries or testes. All right, so we have our endocrine glands that secrete internally into the blood system, and now we have the exocrine glands. These are a little bit different. Exocrine glands secrete hormones to the body's surface or directly to other organs. So these hormones from these exocrine glands are not secreted through the blood. So some of the exocrine glands that we know of are the sweat glands. They secrete sweat. The salivary glands, they secrete saliva. Mammary glands secrete breast milk. Lacrimal glands secrete tears. And the pancreas glands secrete digestive enzymes. Now, if you notice my little asterisk here, the pancreas gland is an interesting organ here. It acts as an exocrine and an endocrine gland, depending on what is secreting, which hormone it is secreting. Alright guys, we are going to take a break here for a second and stop and answer the 5 questions that are in quiz number 1. Alrighty guys, welcome back. Hopefully you were able to go through those questions real quickly and answer them and get back to this lesson. Well, now we are going to start talking about hormones, the chemical messengers of the body. Now these chemical messengers, hormones, can be used to regulate carb, fat, and protein metabolism, water and electrolyte balances, reproductive activity, the body's response to infection and stress. They basically control all the processes of the body. They instigate the processes of the body and stop the processes. So there are 2 classes of hormones that we talk about in anatomy, and those are the steroid hormones. Those are the lipid-based. Those are fat-based. Remember the basic chemicals, biochemicals of the body. Then we have the amino acid hormones, which are protein-based. Now, most hormones are amino acid-based. The only ones that are not are adrenal and reproductive secretions. So while we have our hormones that are the messengers of the body, we have hormone receptors that are our designated message receivers of the body. A receptor is a cell that senses and responds to certain stimuli. So these receptor cells will be reaching out and looking for their certain hormones that initiate them, that tell them, hey, you have a hormone here, that means something needs to happen. So that stimuli that they are looking for is a certain kind of hormone. So when a hormone comes and binds to its designated hormone receptor, that hormone can now influence the activity of the cell. So once those receptors are full, they are bonded to a hormone, the cell realizes that it's time to do something. So receptors can be upregulated or downregulated, basically made better or made worse. Made to work better, made to work worse. So if you upregulate it, you'll increase the sensitivity to a hormone so that less hormones that they usually are receptors for will sneak through and not get noticed. or they can be downregulated, which is decreased sensitivity to hormone. That means that sometimes the hormone they usually find is going to be allowed to get away. So for example, we're going to use the hormone insulin, which is something we're probably familiar with. Insulin breaks down sugars into glucose, and then we store that glucose. So an upregulator, a regulator that makes the insulin receptors more receptive to insulin, is exercise. The more you exercise, the more your insulin receptors are going to be able to receive insulin and break down sugar. And then downregulators for insulin is obesity. Someone who is obese will have less sensitive insulin receptors than someone who is not as obese and maybe exercises more regularly. Now it's time to talk about the more difficult thing to understand in this lecture here. The kinds of hormone secretion control. Controlling how many hormones, how much hormone is released and used. There are 3 kinds that we are going to talk about. They are neural control. And the example there we are going to use is epinephrine. Then we have hormonal control. And the hormone example that we are going to be using there is the hypothalamic releasing hormone. And then humoral control is, and then we are going to be using glucagon for the hormone example of that mechanism. When you see the word neural, you probably think neuron or nerve, which is very useful to remember how neural control works, as neural control is where nerve fibers stimulate endocrine organs to release hormones. The example of this we're going to talk about is the fight or flight response. The fight or flight response is what happens to your body when something happens. You're either ready to stop and fight, or you're ready to run away. So what happens here is the SNS, the somatic nerve system, stimulates the adrenal gland to release epinephrine and norepinephrine. These are adrenaline. So when something happens, say a large dog starts running at you, your body is going to go into fight or flight mode. And then remember, thinking nervous system here, the somatic nervous system is automatic. When something happens, your body goes fight or flight, fight or flight. So your nervous system will stimulate those adrenal glands on top of your kidneys, and they'll release epinephrine and norepinephrine, which are precursors to adrenaline. And these hormones cause increase in heart rate, blood pressure, respiration, blood flow to organs, and then decreases the blood flow to your organs, increase to muscles, and then dilates your pupils and gets you ready to fight or run. Now we're going to talk about hormonal control, of hormonal secretion control. This is achieved by a hierarchy or a chain of command of endocrine organs. The endocrine organs are stimulated by hormones from other endocrine organs. So it is a chain reaction that seeks a response from targeted tissue or organ. So it's a chain reaction. So one hormone is released, and then it gets picked up by its receptors, and those receptors cause another hormone to release, and it goes down the line. So it's like a business. So we have the highest hierarchy, which is the president, which is the hypothalamus. Then we have the vice president of, like a company. So you have the highest, the grand poobah. Then you have his assistant, the vice presidents. So the hypothalamus is the highest. The pituitary gland is the vice president. Then we have the managers, which are the other endocrine organs. So we start out with the hypothalamus, which is the president, directs the pituitary gland, the VP, through a hormone called hypothalamic releasing hormones. So now that the pituitary gland has received the hypothalamic releasing hormones, the pituitary will now release hormones that will stimulate the other endocrine organs. And now these other organs that are receiving orders from the vice president will release their own hormones into the bloodstream to stimulate the target tissues. So on the next slide here we have a diagram that shows what we mean. So here's a diagram of how this hormone secretion control works. We're going to start up here at the top with sensory input from the environment. So let's say something stresses you out. You have a big test tomorrow. This stimulates your central nervous system. You have a lot to do and not a lot of time. So your central nervous system will start stimulating the hypothalamus. Your hypothalamus will then, because it has been stimulated, release hypothalamic hormones. Those are the releasing factors. And these releasing factors will be received by the anterior pituitary, or the vice president, either the anterior or the posterior pituitary, and get in those little receptor cells. And depending on what kind of receptor cells are triggered, it will release different hormones. These 3 to 4 letters abbreviations down here are just different hormones that the pituitary gland will release. So for our purposes, we're going to go with ACTH, a kind of hormone. So the anterior pituitary gland will now release ACTH, which will be received by the adrenal cortex, one of the managers. Now the adrenal cortex will now release its own orders. It's going to release its orders for cortisol, which is the stress hormone, because it received a signal from the anterior pituitary. So looking at it from the business standpoint, the president decides that the workers need to work harder. So the president will send a note to the vice president, and then the vice president will send their own note to the manager. Then the manager will make the workers work harder. So just like in the business, the brain goes from sensory input. That means the hypothalamus, because there's sensory input, will respond and send out its message to the anterior pituitary. The anterior pituitary will release its own hormone, ACTH, which will be received by the adrenal cortex. And the adrenal cortex will then release cortisol, and cortisol will then give you the stress response that we all know so well. And also over here we have norepinephrine and epinephrine being released. This is the fight or flight. So we get a sensory input to the central nervous system, which goes to the autonomic nervous system, which eventually stimulates the somatic nervous system, which will send out its hormones very quickly to the adrenal medulla, which is a part of your adrenal gland, and it will release the norepinephrine and epinephrine as adrenaline, and you will get that increased heart rate and go syndrome, as some people call it. Unlike neural control or hormonal control, humoral control is more of a monitoring way of controlling hormones. So this is achieved by monitoring levels of various substances in body fluids. So remember, the body always wants to be in something called homeostasis, balance. So if we remember from homeostasis, we always want to be in that balanced state. This is my balance, my little scale. We always want to be balanced. Nice and balanced. So if something nudges that balance out of equilibrium, the body is going to make corrective actions to regain homeostasis. So an example of this is blood sugar. So the hormone that helps with blood sugar we know is insulin, and it's also glucagon. So when glucose rises, when you eat a meal and you get that glucose going through your system, the pancreas secretes insulin. So now this insulin will stimulate the absorption of glucose in body tissues. So the body tissues will go, oh, I'll take some glucose, I'll take some things to make energy, which will lower the blood glucose levels. So it's grabbing the glucose and pulling it out of the blood. So now the blood glucose levels are going to drop. So when they drop below where they're supposed to be, the pancreas is going to secrete something called glucagon. So glucagon will cause glycogen, which glycogen is the storage of glucose. It's a big molecule that they just keep adding more and more glucose to. The glucagon will go into the glycogen, lots of gly and glue words in here, to break down into glucose. Now this glucose that has been broken down from glycogen will now go back into the blood, and then the blood sugar levels will rise. So it's a balance, give and take until it reaches the good level of blood sugar. So now what happens when we reach homeostasis again? Well, we have to shut everything down and keep it at that level, right? So what happens is something we've talked about before called negative feedback. It's been a little while, so we're going to talk about it again. Negative feedback is a mechanism that reverses a condition that has exceeded the normal homeostatic range to restore homeostasis. So now we're in homeostasis, but the body's trying to overdo it and go into homeostasis too well. So what happens over here, go over to this picture over here. So we have our hypothalamus. It's going to release our homeostatic releasing hormones that stimulate the anterior pituitary. So now the anterior pituitary, remember, sends out all of those hormones that go to the target gland, which produce hormones. So we have one produced. So we have this hormone. So now we can go back. Negative feedback. So now we have a little too much. So now we have this hormone. So this hormone, when it reaches a certain level, if there's too much of it and all the receptors in the target are filled up, this hormone's going to go back to the hypothalamus and say, hey, stop, we've got enough. So now this hypothalamus is going to secrete a different kind of hormone called the hypothalamic non-releasing hormone. This non-releasing hormone now inhibits the anterior pituitary. So it stops the anterior pituitary gland from producing the hormones needed for the target gland to make more hormones. So when there's too much, that hormone that has been produced goes back and shuts down the hypothalamus, which releases the non-releasing hormone, which stops the anterior pituitary. And then when there's no anterior pituitary hormones that going to the target gland, the hormone stops being made. All right, guys, and that concludes our lesson on the introduction to the endocrine system. Now you can turn off this video and go and take that second checkpoint quiz. For the rest of the unit on the endocrine system, we will be focusing on the major glands and organs of the system. You will be doing a project presentation where you will be presenting about one of our major endocrine organs. Now you can go take that quiz, turn off your computer, and continue your day.